Hi, this is Mr. Weston. Today we're doing a tutorial video on order of operations, and this is from mathdrills.com. Make sure to check out Math Drills. They have way more math resources and worksheets available, so make sure to check them out in the link below. So first off, we're going to talk about order of operations and what this means. PEMDAS, very familiar to many students, but what is it talking about? It's talking about the different operations you can have in math. Now, parentheses is not necessarily an operation, but is telling you in order. So parentheses always comes first. Then you have exponents. That's what the E is. Now, I put the purple for M and D. A lot of students might think that multiplication comes first, but both of these are together. So that's why I wrote them in the same color. Multiplication and division come together. That means whatever one appears first, left to right, that's the one that you're going to do first. And then last, you have addition and subtraction, and they are also equal. Whatever one appears first, left to right, that's the one you're going to do first. So let's go ahead and apply it. Something like this is very common. A lot of parentheses here, and you're not sure exactly where to start. So let's start with an easier one, and then maybe work our way up to one with a little bit more parentheses. So looking at this first example, we have 2 times -2, then -3. Well, we have a couple things going on here. I'm going to change colors. We have some multiplication, we have some subtraction, and it looks like we have parentheses, but we really don't. So if you're looking at the parentheses here, you're like, oh, I got to start with the parentheses. Well, there's nothing to do in the parentheses. It's just a -2. And the reason why it has parentheses, this is very common, is it's trying to separate this negative sign from being right next to a multiplication sign. So that looks a little weird, but if you put parentheses around it, now you say, okay, that's a -2. I'm not doing subtraction or something else, okay? So that's why there's that parentheses there. So it just looks a little tricky, but it's really not that bad once you get used to seeing parentheses around negatives. And there's a lot of those in this worksheet, and that's very common. Okay, so now that we have identified that we have multiplication and then we have subtraction in this particular problem, we know that we're going to first start with multiplication. That's what we're going to do first. So the multiplication we have is simply right here. Now, if you've seen some of my other videos from Math Drills that deal with order of operations, you'll notice that I like to do these little lines here, this little funnel design, because it kind of structures our problem that we're going to start with complex, and the goal is to get less complex until we arrive at an answer. So we have 2 times -2. Well, I know that 2 times 2 is 4, so I'm going to go ahead and write 4 down, and now we just have to deal with negatives, multiplying positives and negatives. A really handy chart is something that looks like this. So let me get my positives and negatives going here. So if I have a positive times a positive, let me get like some multiplication here. So positive times positive, and then I need 2 more. There we go. Okay, so then I have my, just trying to get a system here, and let's do blue for negatives. Okay, so something that looks like this. So if we have a positive times a positive, I should probably put some equal signs in there. Give you about 2 seconds. All right, there we go. So if we have a positive times a positive, we need to know these rules. We're going to have a positive. Okay, the other one is if we have a negative times a negative, we're also going to get a positive. Like signs will multiply together, will give you a positive result. Okay, unlike signs, positive times negative and negative times positive will give you a negative result. So here we see that we have a positive and then we have a negative. That's going to give us a negative result. And then we are done with that multiplication. Now, after I'm done with multiplication, I would like to copy down everything else. So we did this part that's underlined. I can even highlight it. The thing we haven't done yet is this. So we're just going to drop it down next to that -4. And now we have our second step, which is -4 minus 3. I would highly encourage you to check out my video where I talk about adding and subtracting integers from Math Drills. And when I do that video, I talk about if they have the same sign. So here they have a negative and a negative. Okay, I'm not really worried about if they're subtracting or adding. I just like to separate them. I have a -4 and I have a -3. Since they're both the same units, they're going to kind of grow together, okay? They go in the same direction, and so they become -7. Another way to think of it is a number line. I talk about number lines a lot. So if I have 0 here, negative 1, 2, 3, there's negative 3. There's negative 4. I should probably just erase the negative 3, actually. 2, 5, 6, 7. Okay, so if I start on negative 4, okay, as it's indicating here, and then move 1, 2, 3 units to the left because I'm subtracting or I'm adding a negative 3 on there, then I arrive on negative 7. So that's another way you can do a problem like this, is using a number line. Okay, so I think I've covered all the basics of this worksheet. Let's move on to something a little bit more difficult and speed things up. So let's start with the first problem. 2 sets of parentheses. It looks like we need to start with the parentheses, but again, these are just negatives in there, and there's not much to do. So now we're going to see what operations we have. We have multiplication and we have addition. Multiplication, addition. So we're clearly going to start with multiplication and handle the addition later. So I'm going to first do 4 times 5. I'm going to ignore the negative sign. Now I'm going to say to myself, okay, I have a negative and a positive. They're unlike signs. It's going to be a negative result. That's all you got to do with multiplying positives and negatives. It's actually pretty simple. Adding and subtracting tends to be a little bit more difficult. So now we're adding a negative 6. Again, we don't really care about the parenthesis. We could erase it if we wanted to, but it's a nice little separation from the addition and subtraction. So now I'm doing negative 20 added to a negative 6. They're both the same sign. So if you put them next to each other, you're combining, adding is combining 2 negatives. Okay, don't use multiplication rules. It's not like the same thing. If there's 2 negatives, it becomes positives. That's not what it is. That's a very common mistake. Instead, think about they're growing stronger together. They're on the same team. You could even use the number line if you wanted to, and you're going to get negative 26. And that was one of the worst circles I've ever done. There we go. That's a little bit better. All right, so that's that one. I'm going to do the next 2 and then maybe one more. So here we go into this one. This time we have several things going on in the parentheses. Anytime you see 2 parentheses like that, that's because there's a set of parentheses in the parentheses. But as you can see, that first set of parentheses, the inner part of the house is what I like to call the inner room, is just a negative 7. So we have a 5 plus a negative 7. This is where we have 2 different integers signs added together. So we have a positive and a negative. Well, the negative is bigger. The 7 is a negative, and it's bigger. So we know it's going to be a negative result as we do inside the parentheses. Remember, parentheses comes first, and then we also have division. So I should have probably led with that. We're going to do parentheses inside the parentheses first, then the division, which is right there. Okay, so the negative and the positive, we're going to combine those, and the negative is going to win because it's a bigger number. And how much bigger is it? It's 2 units bigger than that 5. So think of it as you got the negative team is 7 points and the positive team is 5 points. How much does the negative team win by? 2 points. So it's negative 2 is the answer. That's my favorite way of thinking about positive and negative numbers. So I'm going to copy down everything else and bring this down. 4 divided by negative 2. It's the same thing. So down here, I put all this as multiplying. You can do the same thing with division. Okay, so it applies for multiplication and division. So when we come up here, we know that if we have a positive divided by a negative, we're going to get a negative result. And we just need to do 4 divided by 2, and we get 2. And that's our answer. Let's move on to the next one. We have parentheses, and we have multiplication. 2 steps. This is a 2-step worksheet. So we have 8 plus a negative 5 in the first parentheses right here. Again, we can ignore this one because it's just a negative 5 inside that one right there, just as a separation. This time the positive is bigger. So 8 is bigger than 5, and 8 is positive, so we know it's going to be a positive answer, and it's going to be 3 because essentially 8 minus 5 is 3. So now we're just going to copy down everything else. Positive 3 times negative 8. Over here we saw that if we are multiplying unlike signs, positive times negative, negative times positive, it's going to be a negative result. So we know it's going to be a negative, and now we just need to do 3 times 8, and that is 24. So negative 24 is our final answer. So I hope you guys see that once you break it down into the proper order, understand order of operations, it can be actually pretty simple. So I'm going to try to see if one of these is more complicated than the rest, and we're going to go ahead and take it on. Not seeing anything that's significantly more difficult. Let's go to this one, though, because it just has one that we haven't done yet. So we have parentheses and we have multiplication. We're going to start with the parentheses. Inside the parentheses, we have 3 minus 8. So, again, this is a positive, and I like to consider this a negative. Some students are like, oh, it's subtracting a positive. Sure, but it's probably easier to think about this whole combination as a unit. A negative 8 and a positive 3. So if you have a negative 8 and a positive 3, the 8 is bigger, so the negative is going to win by 5 points. So negative 5 is going to be the result from that. I'm going to copy down the rest of this, so we have negative 9 times a negative 5. I can do the 9 times 5 right away if I wanted to, and now I just need to figure out what sign do I have. So I have a negative times a negative. That is going to be a positive. I don't need that plus sign, and 45 is going to be my final answer. So if you have any questions on this worksheet, make sure to leave a comment below. Otherwise, thanks for watching. I look forward to seeing you next time right here on Wes Explains Best.